Dom turned over and looked at her and said his skin was too white to stand the sun. Linda laughed and sat in a chair by them. Dom got up to go into the house to the bathroom. Linda opened her legs to Gil and he saw the thin patch of hair that went up from her clit. It was the first time he had seen her pussy. He told her that Dom had asked him to move in with them. Linda said yes, she was aware of that and all for it. He could tell she was serious and that made his decision a lot easier. Dom came out from the house about that time and Gil told them he had made a decision and that he would stay with them when he was released from the hospital. Linda got up and they sandwiched him between them. Linda kissed him and took hold of his limp cock. He looked at her and said Dom had beaten her to it and they all laughed. Gil looked at Dom and said what about her, pointing his arm stump at Linda. Dom answered that she knew her boundaries but sex with her was okay. For now. Linda said thanks to Dom. She got up and gave Linda a kiss and said she was going into the house to start dinner. Linda and Gil kissed for a while with her gently playing with his cock. He asked her about her boyfriend and she said he had left for home about 2 weeks ago and she was back not having anyone in her life. Gil said he would help out as best he could. She said thanks, I knew I could count on you, and started kissing him again. Gil was a little more enthusiastic now that he knew there was no other man in her life. Linda had gotten a little rise out of him but she suggested they get in the pool and he get some more exercise. Gil noticed that her thighs were wet and suggested she sit on his face first. He got no argument out of her and she pulled him down so he was flat and straddled his face. He started lapping her slit and she was soaked and tasted wonderful. It did not take long for his tongue to find her clit and he alternated between that and sticking it into her vagina as far as he could get it. She was leaning forward and looking down at him, watching what he was doing to her. Linda arched her pelvis forward and he was able to get a firm hold on the whole area of her clit and sucked and rocked his head around with his tongue, really doing a job on the tip. She exploded in an orgasm using his lips and teeth to rub her clit even more. After a little while she rolled off him and said that was the best cum any man had given her in a long time. She licked his face off with her tongue and got him into his wheelchair. On the way to the pool she noticed he was semi-hard. She got him onto the lift and into the water. She had forgotten the life preserver but Gil had learned how to float and move around so had no problem. Linda stayed right by him though. She kept rubbing her breasts and hard nipples into the shoulder socket of his missing right arm. Gil told her that both the feeling of her nipples and the idea of what she was doing was very sexy. She told him she loved missing limbs and the results they left behind. Linda said I hope you are not offended and Gil said no, just the opposite. She said good and kissed him. Her hand found his cock and it was hard again. She still wondered if she could get him in her, nothing that big had ever come her way before. Linda was also glad Dom had gotten to him first, now he should last longer while she was screwing him. They got out of the pool a few minutes later and she got Gil back on the lounge. Linda joined him and started sucking on him. He was soon big and hard and Linda decided it was now or never. She was very wet from just having him in her mouth so lubrication was not an issue she hoped. She straddled him and rubbed the purple head of his cock around her pussy to get it nice and wet. She finally stuck it into her vagina and started to let herself down on it. She took it nice and slow, cupping her breasts and pinching her nipples. Her eyes still got real big and her mouth formed into an O. Finally after a few minutes it was mostly all in. She bent over to look and see how much was left, which was still a little. Gradually all of it was in and she felt full, very full. Her clit made contact with his pubic bone and that made her jump. She jumped halfway up his cock, stopped and then went up a little more and then started down again. After a few minutes of slowly moving, she stretched enough to start getting a great feeling deep inside her. She was able to move faster and finally when she was lubed good, was pumping him with some gusto. That feeling turned into fireworks as she had both a clit and G-spot orgasm at the same time. Gil had started to say fuck me to her a few seconds before she exploded. She looked into his eyes as she did and was sure hers showed pure lust. Linda fell forward onto her arms for a few seconds, then down onto Jill's chest. He was still impaled in her. Jill was able to get to the side of her breast with his stump and he started rubbing it. This helped bring Linda around and she raised her head and kissed him. She looked into his eyes and said, "Holy shit, another first or second or whatever it was." They laughed and she started moving her hips. Linda told him it was his turn now and pushed herself back upright. She had adjusted to his size and started working him good. She put her fingers behind her and used them to stimulate him where he entered her. Jill looked up at her with a worried look on his face all of a sudden and said he forgot to ask if he could come in her pussy. Linda said, "You better." His head went back a little, his eyes closed and he said coming as he started pumping cum into her. He had several strong spurts and then quit. Linda clenched her vag muscles tight on him and he started to go limp and finally fell out of her. She leaned forward again and kissed him saying thanks, she needed that. Linda got a wet towel and cleaned both of them up. She did not notice Dom standing by the door watching them. She went back to the kitchen with a big smile on her face, happy for both of them. She did not mind sharing with Linda, up to a point. Linda came in and asked what she could do to help and Dom took her into her arms and gave her a big hug and kiss on the mouth.